Well, welcome back to the Economy Wellbeing Podcast, and I'm really happy to have Matt Ehret as my guest. Matt, you're in Montreal or just outside of Montreal. You're a brilliant young mind historian. You and your wife Cynthia are just doing Canada such a service by actually, you know, unveiling the true history of Canada, let alone the British Empire and everything else that we should actually be listening to. Uh, So thanks for joining me in this conversation wherever it takes us.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure, Mark. Thank you for the kind words, and yeah, I'm looking forward to this little chat.
Yeah. So what I know typically people ask, so who's Matt Ehret and what's your story? I know I've watched so many of your podcasts and or interviews that I know you started off in arts, I think, and was it
Yeah,
film or just painting, just fine arts?
it was originally I always liked art, but I originally went through illustration. So I was oriented towards comic books, maybe storyboarding
Oh,
originally,
cool.
covers for magazines, books. So I did a few of those things, and then moved on to university. This was in CEGEP, so Montreal has or Quebec has a weird system where
Yeah.
between high school and university, there's this CEGEP thing that could be 2 to 3 years. So I did a 3 year career program, and I decided to try to tap into a little bit more of my artistic side because I found that illustration was a little bit overly sales oriented and technical, which was good, gave me some rigor, but at the same time, I didn't feel like I was really expressing a certain part of my emotions that I felt I had to cultivate. So I thought fine arts, and I liked film, so I was thinking maybe doing animation might be an orientation to experiment with. So I did that in university. I did that for 2 years, but unfortunately, I, re- I had to reject it at a certain point because simply the environment I was operating in was a little bit, I guess we could say, culty. It was culty,
Mm.
and the cult wasn't a. It was a cult really of ugliness. A lot of the ideologues who had taken control over many decades before I had even entered were pretty committed to an aesthetic, a philosophical aesthetic around a cult of ugliness, really a deconstructionism. You can call it postmodernism. But the idea was that artists had a moral responsibility to liberate society from the shackles of beauty. So
Wow.
part of
Wow.
the there's a lot of assumptions embedded within that philosophy. But number one is that, and it comes out of the Frankfurt School, philosophers of Walter Benjamin and Eric Fromm and George Lukács, who were sort of the intellectual pioneers behind the rise of modernism, abstract art, atonalism, contemporary art. All of this sort of emerged and was justified by these early 20th century philosophers who were all brought into the school of Chicago, California, New York, New School. So this is what was at the heart of a lot of the reforms in education in the 60s, the creation of a lot of ugly buildings, ugly architecture in the
Yeah, just
70s that people all
everything's
kind of, you know,
yeah, it's
that
true.
was everywhere. And I couldn't live in that type of environment. And so I got out of there at a certain point.
Wow. Did you grow up in Quebec or
Yeah.
wow, Montreal?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's my wife's born in Montreal
Oh yeah.
and yeah.
Oh,
And
cool.
oh, what's the rich part? West
Westmount.
Westmount.
Oh
Yeah.
wow. Snazzy.
So yeah, and her dad still lives there and yeah, and we
Oh, so
go
you guys come down to visit
yeah, and
frequently?
the dad's still alive. He's 90, he'll be 91. He part of the banking dynasty. Her grandfather was president of Bank of Montreal
Oh wow.
and they had all that house summer houses at Knowlton, Lac Brome, right? So
Nice.
that's yeah, interesting. I didn't realize who I was marrying into. I was like, holy shit. It's like you so grandma like who I called it Club Oakville because it had a place right on the lake in Oakville.
Yeah.
And her name is Mimi Mulholland. So Mulholland was her husband's name, who was president of Bank of Montreal
Okay.
in the 60s. And then her grandfather was Sir James Aikens, who founded the Canadian Bar Association and was
Wow.
lawyer counsel to McDonald on Riel's trial. So the weirdest things I like, wow, I just married into, I don't know what I got married into, but
Yeah, you really yeah, walked right into the establishment. Okay.
oh yeah. So then I being a student of monetary policy and money itself, I was very intrigued, and I would ask strategic questions at dinner time about, you know, how this. And I didn't realize that I don't even think I never met grandfather, but you know, I wasn't convinced that any of them actually knew how any of this works, like how money's created, or you know, what the Corporation of London actually is, and all these things. So it was
Yeah,
a
no,
deep rabbit hole, right? As you know, right? And
yeah, I'm it's amazing, right? Like the when you just speak to people who are really they've made their careers on the inside, it's like the more inside you are, the less you appreciate what the hell you're in. Because you're just like so hyper adapted to your world that you don't think
uh,
about what's shaping the world necessarily outside of your field.
so it makes me wonder, and I know we don't have to retread all of the amazing stuff you've talked about over your years, but on like the Corporation of London and all that stuff, and its history, and it's the Magna Carta, and then you sort of do wonder whether these folks are actually as organized as we maybe give them credit for, that things are rather chaotic. And so the question I want to explore maybe today is like, and you've touched on something that I've talked about a lot, is what's the storyboard? If, you know, if we want, like, I've got this vision of economy well-being. I was given that basic vision in Jerusalem 31 years ago when I went there, my vision quest, and thought about being a priest or a monk. And I would have been happy just making cheese or beer or meat or something, but and maybe a Sulpician monastery in Montreal. Anyways, but,
Got an interesting background, man.
but that's not what God had in store for me. So, but I'm curious about, you know, your understanding of history, and so the challenges that I'm facing with storyboarding this new vision of economy well-being, and what I've come to realize in writing two books is, you know, the language, like language is powerful, and the words, like the word wealth comes from the Old English, the conditions of well-being, and yet Adam Smith never defined the word wealth. And I say, well, that's because he was Scottish. He couldn't admit that the 13th century English actually understood what that well meant, right? And so what I've done is kind of reconstructed this whole um, economic monetary structure and say, well, if well-being is a central organizing principle, then why is it that we aren't orienting everything to well-being?
Yeah, no, it's
And
a
then
fundamental question, right?
so
That's
then how do we navigate? Do we have a hope that we can change the system, the matrix that orients itself? And you being a history of this
mhm.
long sweep of history, you know, whether it's Chinese or Russian or um, just thought we might riff on that and see where it takes us, because to me it's fascinating, and it all comes down to me, like working with First Nations, is like that fundamental understanding, like the spirit and intent of treaties, that we are both, whether it's Her Majesty or His Majesty, and the chiefs, and there were no chiefs actually, that's a colonizer word. We're rooted in the understanding that we're all the Creator's children. We all live under natural law, and
Mm.
that's really an important reflection, because otherwise we live under some other artificial, you know, common law or civil law in the French case. So I'll stop talking and let you riff.
Yeah, yeah, no, dude. Quick question, side note, trivial but curious. You said that the idea of chiefs is a colonizer's term that was brought. I didn't know that. What
It's
was
a
the
French word. It's actually a French word, and the
huh,
word, what does it mean?
chef?
I know the word Cree actually originally the word Cree for the Cree people was Christian. It was based on the word Christian. So like all of these words, like the closest maybe the Dene maybe go back to their original, uh, you know, or the Mi'kmaq or the right
Oh,
Haudenosaunee,
um,
not the Iroquois, Haudenosaunee, right? So
huh. And can so first question was there what was the higher like the leaders of the tribes? How did they refer to themselves if it wasn't chiefdoms and what have you? What were or were there no leadership
they
positions the
were,
way I think of a hierarchy of leaders in my
well, we can go back to originally there were clan structures, so it was actually either matrilineal or patrilineal, right?
okay.
And so it was families, like, you know, Ehret would have, you know, your grandmother would be, say, the clan mother, and you would decide as a family, like, Matt's going to be our chief of peace or chief of war, or not even chief, just leader, right? Leader of. So that was that was of course all broken by the British, who, if I was at the Fort Anne in Annapolis Royal, which is named after Queen Anne, uh, and there was a mural at the fort there which showed that there were 64 Mi'kmaq leaders and one representative of the crown. So that's just shows you 64 representatives of clans or families that had to kind of find a way of uh, a common position that they would negotiate with one representative of Her Majesty who never even came.
Yeah.
So now, if you go to Onondaga, so Onondaga, in Syracuse, that's the home fires of the Haudenosaunee, the Six Nations. So they're the ones actually who went over to James's palace in 1710 to meet with Queen Anne. One of them died on the way, and she called them Red Indians because she was so amazed at these men, and they had red ochre. So one of the tribes was the Ottawa tribe, the Oneida, the Onondaga. So I've been in the Longhouse in Onondaga, and that's where they still have the clan structure. So if you go in the Longhouse, there's 49 osprey headdresses representing 49 clans for 5,000 people.
Hmm.
And so you'll have the wolf clan, the turtle clan, the osprey clan, like et cetera, et cetera. Usually all animal related. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. Well, I guess yeah. So I get returning to your original theme of yeah, of a society founded upon, or an economy founded upon, a principle of the well-being of the people. That's indeed, I think, been the dominant challenge shaping all of human history. Is how do we actualize in this domain of the realm of becoming, where things change in the state of flux, and we identify things in processes. um how do we navigate things and create such means that better effectuate the ideal from that higher realm of being, the higher reality, of principles that are unchanging, right? Where around which the idea of love in its ideal sense, an idea of justice in its ideal sense, can best interact or guide the flow of our decision making and our problem solving in the real world, where our bodies exist and flow and have a boundary condition. There's a boundary outside of which my body doesn't exist, but and before and after in time, where I, bodily speaking, won't exist. But
Right, right.
you know,
So let me just
mm,
interject and say that part of my story, my calling, I call it my calling to this vocation in Jerusalem, was clear. I would go to the Holy Sepulchre every night. I was in the Old City for 2 weeks, staying at Ecce which looked over the Dome of the Rock, so Temple Mount.
oh wow,
And I had all kinds of mystical experiences. So, and I'd been to Egypt. Egypt was cool, but it was nothing like Jerusalem. And I just heard this very clear, uh, you know, call to build a civilization of love. And the other thing that came to me is the money changers crucified Christ because he overturned their tables in the temple. So I'm like, wait a minute, that's a whole new view for me of history. So it's like, well, how do we build a civilization of love when the basis of our being is love? So how is it that we came so far away, wandered so far away from that truth, and we can't seem to find our way back to that? Because we
yeah,
have the systems of whatever you want to call it. You could say it's occult, you could say all those other things, but that's what I'm intrigued is like, so how in the art of war do we create something more compelling, as Buckminster Fuller said? It's more compelling than the current narrative and storyboard, which is boring, right? Stupid, whatever you want, you know.
yeah. Well, I mean, I was speaking with my friend just last night, Dr. Quan Le, and he's a remarkable scholar, and somebody who I really respect his philosophy. He's Chinese, but he's got a real deep immersion in both Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, Platonism. He's a Platonist, was trained using a Platonic teaching system when he was a child. So he's got a very good universalist approach to analyzing the human psyche, the human condition, philosophy, but also he's a good geopolitician too. So he's got a pretty good sense of the pulse of geopolitics. So I appreciate his insights. And he was making the point to me in our conversation yesterday about Lao Tzu's Art of War.
Yes.
And he made a point in contrasting it.
Oh, Sun Tzu.
Sun Tzu, sorry, not Lao Tzu. No, sorry, Sun Tzu. Yeah,
Lao Tzu's stanzas were, yeah.
Come on. Right. I did a class on Lao Tzu as well, which is why it was hard in my mind. But no, sorry.
I was senior advisor to China for 3 years, so I know a little bit about.
No, so Sun Tzu's Art of War, and he made a point in his discourse with me that there's a lot of similarities to Plato's Republic. And he emphasized a bit of frustration or disappointment that many of his Western friends don't tend to pay proper respect to the first 6 chapters of the Art of War, and they like going straight into the 7th chapter to, I think, 13th, which deals with the more practical, elements of like how do you actually, scheme and battle and like properly carry out strategy practically. But the part that he said that drew so many parallels to Plato's Republic is on the issue of self-knowledge and organizing your society around harmony, around justice, and that means also knowing yourself and organizing the city within our own hearts, if you want to think about it.
Right.
Like a humanist spiritual alchemy or something.
It's actually, I know this again, I go in tangents, but it's not that far from the Ignatian examen that Loyola developed, right? Where you bring all that chi energy up to your heart space, right? But you could say, well, having studied qigong, yeah, of course
it works because it works. But I mean, like when you do meditation and you think through, you think through whatever you're thinking through, right? You want to work through a problem in your mind. It's better to do it first, and then when you start acting it out, let's say if you're going to be performing as a musician or as an actor, if you've really done the mind work, which a lot of people haven't exercised that deeply, but if you have, you're going to be much, much better equipped when you actually get on stage and perform because you've prepared yourself. And that's one of the reasons why the Jesuits, I think, in some ways won a lot of respect from a lot of the natives, whether it was in Japan or South America, that they would get burnt and like tortured to death frequently because they would often try to get they would get a little too big for their britches, right? Because they had their own motives going into these various cultures to infuse certain things and transform certain society people that they were going into, and they would frequently get tortured to death. And despite getting tortured to death, they did win respect because the people watching who were like, oh my God, they're really taking that pain well, because they prepared themselves. Part of their conditioning is like really working your mind for years in deep meditation of smelling the flesh burning off you in hell, and like they work through it. I'm not saying that that's necessarily, that could be done for good or for bad purposes, right? Like the art of that type of meditation, but it does come with a power, a creative power that is associated with that exercise. So I'm not a fan of the Jesuits or Ignatius Loyola, but that being said, it works because it works. It works because it's real.
That's right. I'm not a fan either. I mean, I've always believed that we would come to this point where we would have a Jesuit Pope, and even within their charters, they apparently there was never supposed to be a Jesuit Pope.
No.
Within the Jesuit order, it was like no way. But anyway, that itself is an interesting. I mean, that's a rabbit hole, and it's like we can get into how they kind of mimic or are much like Freemasonry and blah blah blah. But anyways, it's my theory on the infiltration of the church as well, which is.
Mine too.
Good. Mine too. Good. And I'm a Catholic, so I'm like, I could say that, without hesitation.
Right. You got extra street cred. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Catholic, but at the same time, like as a geopolitical, so I'm approaching it a little bit more like through the geopolitical lens than the theological lens per se. But yeah, I mean, objectively, I see that there was already major problems and insurrectionary movements within the church before Loyola had his great awakening in the cave. Before that, there was already problems, but
So
it got
here,
a lot
so here's
worse.
an interesting. Okay, here's another tributary here. So listening to your last conversation about the Jesuits, when you talked about the Venetians, right? And you say,
Mhm.
well, we do also know in 1490, is it 1493, 1497, and a guy named Luca Pacioli and his friend Leonardo da Vinci came up with the double entry bookkeeping system, uh, which was just before then the Jesuits kind of came to life, and so you had, you were saying the Venetians were kind of on the ropes, and I would say like it was Luca's work, a Franciscan mathematician and monk, who had basically, in my view, just adopted what the Sumerians already had adopted in the understanding of sacred geometry. Debits equals credit, right? As in nature, so in accounting, helped the Medicis then rise to power as bankers of Florence, and so we still have that accounting system. But the only way that debits can equal credit, and I have an accounting background, is if you monetize the transactions. Because with only qualitative attributes of the bookkeeping entry, how do they balance, right? Except maybe energetically. But so that to me was interesting. So in a way, it gave rise or it empowered the money power in a way, right? And that's kind of my view of what may have transpired with the Medicis. And I think the Medicis then infiltrated, became embedded in the Vatican structure, right? Some of them became popes, and the Jesuits became the bankers of, right, of the church. So you could say, okay, there's two complicit criminals here, if you like. There's the Corporation of London, and then there's the Vatican with its and I know this from being involved in the whole archdiocese here at Edmonton, is that there's no official accounting of the assets of the church or the diocese, the properties, the land. That's a violation of basic accounting principles. So then, on this basis of, then where are the assets booked, if not on the balance sheet of Canada, which they're not allowed to be? They've got to be booked somewhere else.
Okay, well, so
I know
the,
that's a
there's
crazy
two different
tangent.
strains of thought that are connected that you're bringing up, which is number on the theory level and the practical level. So you've got two different sort of
Yeah.
modalities that are part and parcel of the same thing. Um, in
I've
in
just
terms
wrecked
of
my
the theory,
storyboard, right? It was what you're saying.
yeah, like, well, it's to parse it out a little bit. The issue that you're bringing up on the theory level that I think is important for me, the way I tend to think about the human challenge in the universe is that in from that level that I was referring to at the beginning of the domain of becoming, the Plato's state of reality of the constant flux world. There's still a tempo and an order, right? So behind the seeming chaos of the senses and the sensual domain, there's still a
Mhm.
quantization that's discoverable, ordering and organizing things that on the surface might appear chaotic, whether it's the stars in the night sky or the
Right.
the the cycles of the seasons. At first one might not see the rhythm, but then the mind is able to penetrate and see, aha, okay, there's
Yeah.
periodicities that have sort of quantized, discoverable, a many bounding the oneness and the infiniteness of it all, like the
Like
infinite.
like the Fibonacci or whatever it is, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like exactly. You grow what Pacioli was exploring with Da Vinci was, and they worked together. It's true on an exploration of the golden section, and their book, which I have a friend of mine named Rick, an old friend. I haven't spoken to him in a decade now, but he did the only translation into English of the Divine Proportion by
Divina
Pacioli,
Proporziano. Yeah.
the Divino Proporziano. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
had the good fortune to work through that book
Wow.
in
I,
a study group over the course of a year.
that's
Um,
fantastic. I saw a copy of it in Bologna at Stefano Zamagna, who's the Dean of Economics.
Oh,
in
did you get a chance to work through some of the proofs?
Well, I looked at it because it was, of course, written in Latin, and in the back are all Leonardo's, sketches.
Yep. Yeah,
Um,
Da Vinci did all the illustrations for
yeah,
it.
yeah.
And yeah, the whole thing is like how to render the divine proportion intelligible to the inquisitive mind, to sort of demystify it, because a lot of the problem with the mystery cults is that they will utilize sacred geometrical facts, but then they will skip the discovery part and go straight to the infusing of meaning by
Mm,
a high priesthood into the proportions that are discoverable within, let's say, the Vesica Pisces. When you have just basically two circles overlapping with a common radius. That's like elementary. If you have a healthy education system and a healthy non-oligarchical culture, that's just like one of the elementary kindergarten steps that you'd want kids to have fun playing with, to just play with a compass, see what your mind zeroes in on, what fun relationships allow you to, let's
right.
say,
Yeah, yeah.
figure out how to construct all of the regular polyhedra, the five platonic solids, utilizing only compasses and a straight edge, and you discover very quickly what is these trends. You get a rational understanding of the relationship of the finite to the infinite, right? Like the if that radius of that circle is 1, it's finite. I can get my mind around the number 1. Well, thus, when I start wrapping it around the circle, I'll notice that that 1 will go 6 times around, creating a nice, beautiful hexagon. And I'll be able to also see when I do the Vesica Pisces, I'll be able to very quickly see where the square root of 3, the square root of 2 come from as far as relationships. One just being the diagonal, right,
Right.
of a square when I try to double the square, like Plato does in the Meno dialogue. I'll be able to very quickly see where the square root of 5 comes from, which is I need to understand that in order to figure out how to make a pentagon, which I need to do if I want to make a dodecahedron. So, and if I want to understand the golden section, I have to explore these things. And along the way, I'll like Luca Pacioli takes us through in a beautiful way. I'll understand when I'm looking at the number system of the square root of 5 minus or plus 1 over 2. I won't be just inclined to mystify it or worship it or believe some priesthood's interpretation of what this means that might be colored into a brainwashing ritual. But I will look at it and I will see with my mind's understanding what is the physical process behind the mathematical expression. So that would just be like a good, healthy, again, grade 1. All of this stuff should have already been joyfully discovered by a kid.
Absolutely. Uh,
Uh,
I guess
I, yeah,
that's the basis of my accounting proposal too, is that, again, I go back to my accounting theory, which I was abysmal at accounting and never lasted a year with PwC, with PwC now, right? But it's funny how the Lucas stuff comes back and saying, so what are the characteristics of an asset? I don't care if it's a bookshelf or it's a wetland or forest. And to be able to define the characteristics of flourishing, the flourish means to flower, right? What are those characteristics, and how do I assess them? Because that's the basis of flourishing, to optimize, right? You want to optimize, and then you could say, well, I want to optimize well-being
yeah,
across a number of asset class. Isn't that really the objective of life, is to, try to live in an optimum state of joy or aspiration of love? Like, that could be the basis of accounting. I mean, I think that was the spirit of what Luca was trying to do.
yeah. I think so too. And I think that because part of it, I think they were trying to educate the leaders of society, the intelligentsia, who they would be able to think about first, what is a transcendental? Like the difference between the mathematical language that we utilize, which is great, but it's always math by its character is a closed system. It's a language
Mhm.
which is grounded by whatever axioms we have that reflect the level of discovery we are at that given moment. So the
Right,
language is
right.
like a language. It can
Yeah,
get better
yeah.
or it can get worse. We could forget things that we once knew, and the entire language will shrivel up, or we make new discoveries that supersede inferior ordering thoughts that are at the grounding of the whatever axioms that are the foundation of our theorem lattice. and then our language will improve with, but it won't improve. It won't improve. Thus, that first, it won't improve first. It will follow the creative discoveries of people who have to think in a poetic way, in a creative way, because the universe shows demonstrably that creativity and love and reason are ordering the flow of the universe. I mean, and you could prove it as a people say, oh, but that's a theological theory. That's not a proof. And it's like, well, how did we go from simple celled organisms on the earth some time ago? I won't say how long, because I don't believe that our dating systems are viable, but whatever the case may be, we know that in fossil records, things get more boring the deeper into the past we go.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden we're having this incredible conversation over light speed. You
Yeah.
know, it's like, is that random?
What?
Or is that like a reflection of what the universe is? That process a reflection of what the entire universe is wired to do already, even before human beings appeared onto the scene? And I would say the evidence shows probably, yeah. But so then, if you're going to then create a scientific language that will shape economics, and I think the fight over like a science of economics has always been there, because it's difficult, because unlike other sciences that don't take into consideration human free will, you know, the ability to be stupid, willful,
that's right.
You know, corruption, it's not there. The planet isn't going to wake up corrupt. You know, Venus is just going to be Venus. So in that sense, we need to have something which is structured, but at the same time that abides by natural laws and takes into consideration creativity and free will. So that's not easy, and it's really hard. And so I think that the first step is to have an appreciation that that the math will always need to do justice to the reality. And the reality is that there's constantly this growth, the qualitative and quantitative growth function in the universe. You know, there's this yearning to be more to be more than we are. And I think when you look at the golden section, what's so cool about it is that if you could tile squares or triangles together, you could just tile and fill space, two-dimensional space, and it'll just go on.
Yeah.
But when you try to start introducing pentagons, which incorporate the golden section, it's always an open system. You will never get a closed, you can never get a closed symmetrical system. And I think that lack of closure implies a certain natural asymmetry that must exist in the universe.
So what you just said is brilliant, because you just said when you introduce a pentagram or pentagram, right?
Well, both the star or the actual.
So can we riff on this? Like, because I've studied Lao Tzu, and you know, when I was in China, I would read Wang Liping, the story of the 19th generational Green Dragon Gate Taoist wizard. I was told, like, you got to read this book when you go to China. I'm like, okay. So I'm sitting in Emperor Qianlong's palace in Chengde, yeah, and in his daughter's palace. I'm reading from his students. Now, this guy was Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. He was like a master. Like, he could translocate. He was like, I'm like, is this guy real? And then I learned that he's at the Temple of World Fragrance in the Bada Chu Hills. And I'm like, where's that? My mystic friend said, oh, I don't know where that is. You got to find out where like, that could be Lhasa, it could be anywhere, right? Turns out it's the western outskirts of Beijing. So I attempt to go see him, but I have no address. I don't have a phone number. I don't even know what he looks like. But I'm reading his book, and he says, the way of China will be right, the way of the Tao will not. Like, okay, there's 8 forms. So to your point, it's like, what is it about the 5 versus 4, which is a medicine wheel, versus 8? And what is Lao Tzu pointing to that perhaps creates an interesting future where you have a Confucian system of governance of China married with this Taoist Qigong kind of, and then I'm going to throw in the Russian sentiment. I don't even know what that means. Like, you probably catch that one and understand what the Russian dynamic, or maybe the ancient Vedrus people, the ancient Vedrus people, contemporary to the Celts, who are in the taiga, and they're dating back 26,000 years. And Putin knows about them, like, anyways. So I'm trying to like put all this together and say, And the Vedrus people, Vedrus, were basically their whole structure was love. And that when the Romans came up there, the most elite regiment, they didn't know what to do with them until, so they went back to Rome saying, well, we couldn't conquer them because they were all about love. And I would say Lao Tzu probably understood that too.
Yeah.
Why else would he want to leave China and go, uh, and yet you have a very ancient Confucian structure of governance, which
Mhm.
seems to work. And then you've got his kind of prophetic, like without,
Well, yeah, yeah. Well, again, Quan Le, you got to talk to him. Maybe he might
yeah,
be a fun
I'd love
guest
to
for you
talk.
on your podcast at some point. Actually, I'll send
Where's
you.
Quan Le?
He's actually based in Montreal too.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, but he was making the point that that there's a lot of common principles embedded both within the I Ching and Taoism as well as Confucianism. But you have perversions of both, and you have good, like beautiful expressions, more authentic expressions of both, right? And it's like that for every viable so-called religion or I think philosophy, which has transcended multiple generations. You'll typically find perversions that will attempt to wear, as my co-host Gordon has said in a couple of shows I've done with him, skin suits. From the Silence of the Lambs
Oh
imagery.
yeah, jeez, yeah, it's kind of creepy, but yeah,
It's creepy, but I think it hits the nail on the head because you do have these
yeah.
Muslim and these Christian and these Jewish and these Buddhist and these Confucian skin suits,
Yes.
where at the inner heart you have something similar, which is sort of like as somebody who follows and I've studied a lot of Plato, and I would consider myself closely aligned as a Christian humanist Platonist. That's sort of my orientation. Is that I'm looking for the universal attributes to everything. Like, so what's the universal that is the pattern that is shaping the tempo of whatever my senses are picking
Right.
up, right?
Yeah.
So part of that is that when I look at dark ages, whether in India or China or the West throughout history, I'm looking at, well, what are the common themes that of folly, of corruption, that result in dark ages, societies breaking up, forgetting what their past knowledge, for losing touch with natural law. And what are those patterns associated with Renaissance movements, where you see explosions of population growth and discoveries and lessening of like master slave structures of control? And again, whether I'm looking at the deep history of China when there's been moments of population collapse and war, versus times like the Han Dynasty or the Tang Dynasty, where there's moments of like growth, qualitative and quantitative, or in the West, same thing. You could there's certain attributes to the perverse skin suit creatures that might act Buddhist or act Confucian or act Christian, but they're operating under a deceitful structure where they're happy to kill as many of their fellow sort of Buddhists or Confucians or Christians that they're acting like they're a part of, but they're not. So that this is where these weird ancient mystery cults have, I think, found a way to sort of like recalibrate in the past 2,000 years, especially to subvert things from within, but operating always within a priesthood of a master slave structure of an elitist class with special, Gnostic knowledge that they've just acquired through certain special means.
Self-proclaimed Gnostic,
Self-proclaimed, right? Like, yeah, exactly. Prove that you merit what you just say as being you're a wise person. Prove it. Demonstrate it. They can't.
I think
They
therefore
can't.
I am. Like, come on.
Yeah. So all that to say, what Quan was going through is the similarities, the common principles of Taoism and Confucianism that have been able to work together at various times throughout history. And the Confucians obviously have the defect, just like the Platonists do, throughout the years, of Neo-Confucianism or Neoplatonism, where often you'll have the legalists, right? Those who treat the formal aspects of what Confucius wrote in the Analects or what Plato wrote in, let's say, the Republics. They'll treat the outward form as if it was literally true and try to impose these fascist like structures of rules onto society at the deprivation of the soul and the spirit, which is crushing. And then but they're just doing the form. They actually don't have the love of the people that Confucius or his authentic followers like Mencius or Shusi felt, because they actually loved people. They loved themselves. They loved the idea of Tianmin. So that, like, the harmony of as above, so as below. They actually, like, that was the soul. And it's the same thing for the Christian feudalists and crusaders or the
Oh
Platonists.
yeah, I mean,
The Neoplatonists, they all are abusive. They don't love people. They actually hate
they
people.
hate people. Yeah.
Yeah. And
It-
and so that hate filters through top down in every particle and parcel of the systems that they try to manage,
yeah.
down to the street gangs that are just operating with a little oligarchy within their little mafia,
Right.
satrap of New York, or Hong Kong triads and the Green Gang. Like, they're all expressing, like, on their local level, a part, like, of the essence of what makes the oligarchy tick. Not love. So
I
yeah,
love.
it always
So
comes back to what you were saying.
so I guess again from storyboarding, because I want to like look out and say, if we were to develop a more compelling art, again, Bucky, right? What does he say? In order to, you can't expect a new system. The old system has to die, and you have to present something more compelling, which I think is the art of war as well. Like, not just know your enemy, but that your enemy understands that your idea is more compelling than theirs. So what I'm thinking is, well, how then do you overcome this? I'll call it the matrix of artificial scarcity, right? We're told like money's scarce. No, money's not scarce. Money can be created an infinite amount, aligned with well-being or aligned with assets. The BRICS, I hope that's their intention. That's why I saw China potentially understood, never confirmed, because they would never talk to us. Even when we asked, like, did you use Abe Lincoln's ideas, or are you just, what are you doing over there? Because you're gonna, when CSIS called me one day and said, "Hey, I want to interview you," it's like, for what? It's like, I'm like, I'm on your blacklist? No, no, we just want to know what your opinions are of Chinese business so far in the belt, the new Silk Road. I'm like, you understand they're going to beat us at our own game. Do you understand that? What tell us more? So, here I'm educating CSIS agents, which is outrageous. Um, but so to say, like, how would you as an artist sort of, and I'm gonna say, you're the superhero. You're the superhero of love. Has there ever been a superhero of love? No. Luke Skywalker, they're all like looking for the wrong thing. How do we compel young Canadians to say, actually, there's only a few of these sociopaths, narcissists, right? Psychopaths running the show. And how is it that we have sort of acquiesced and fallen under their spell when we are hardwired to be loved?
It's a tough question. I mean, it's
I know.
hard. It's hard, right? Because, like, we're born into, so many young people especially were born into an already captured society with artificial value systems infused into it, that are tempering the subtle invisible processes of the culture that are shaping their identities. And I know for myself it was very challenging back in I guess I started wrestling with some of these more challenging ideas about, like, what's managing my world, what is that, like, how do these discoveries I'm making objectively impact who I thought I saw myself being, the type of person I saw myself becoming. Like, it's very existential.
Oh, geez.
It's a bit
Bravo,
traumatic. I think
bravo
it's
to
like
your
that for
parents. Like, I don't
huh?
know who your parents are, but like, bravo to them too. Like, for who
Well, my,
you
my mom
are.
my mom was great, in the sense that she was very giving and charitable and loving, and she really took that seriously. So that was like a lesson, that I didn't have too many role models that believed in the agapic approach.
Right, right.
So that was valuable, on that level. It's hard to account logically in hindsight for what exactly was my
Of
process,
course.
but all I'd say, I know that was important for sure. That being, like, I remember having a debate with her one time when I was going through a bit of a cynical, troubling moment, maybe 19 or so, and I was very much inclined to just brush humanity off because I was just encountering I was just studying all the corruption and all the stupidity, and I was just like, we're doomed. We're
We're
a
just
shit species.
we're going
And
down, man.
yeah, and I remember her like it was meaningful. It became a forever memory. So it must have been meaningful where I was having this debate, and she was defending the idea that humanity is actually not bad, not intrinsically bad. And I said, no, you know what? She was at the time working as a secretary in an engineer, not a secretary. She's working in an engineering company. Um, and she had some sensitive information that she was like working with in associated with R&D. And I was like, look, if somebody were to offer you $1 million to just make a photocopy and like share a blueprint, you would do it. And she looked at me without batting an eye and said no. And I believed her. She said it with such conviction. I was like, oh, you're not that for me, just that personal testimony was like, okay, I'm skipping steps here in my judgment against humanity. And so what was I saying? So I'm saying this just because young people, right? So young people have, and for myself, I know a lot of my idea of what human nature was, why we do things, that all of my concepts were very much affected by like the comic books I was reading that showcased that pretty much again and again, that the reasons why we do good, if you ask Spider-Man or
Yeah,
Batman or
or
Superman, it's
Superman. Yeah,
or the X-Men characters, like why are they doing good? What's their motive? It's like
yeah,
guilt for not being there when Uncle Ben needed you, or revenge because you were a child watching your parents get shot and now you're a vigilante, or
yeah.
something.
That's
Guilt or revenge are like the two primary motives. Or
or
Superman,
the Disney narrative of Orphan, right? Yeah,
or the Disney thing gets contaminated a little bit with the whole royals. Everybody wants to be the princess or the
yes,
prince.
that's
But
right.
even in the animal kingdom, there's like so,
Oh,
but
well done on the superheroes. I agree with you. Yeah,
yeah. So the idea of like just being able to be exposed to the type of higher sentiments that humanity has expressed at its most beautiful moments, of the higher agapic love that
yeah,
animates like the heart of a Joan of Arc or a Gandhi. I would say Gandhi, well, maybe less Gandhi nowadays, but Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and like
yeah,
they
yeah.
really did love the principle of justice and humanity. And they had a sense of their own, the health of their soul, to such an extent that they were willing to die, to suffer and die for the sake of these higher this higher reality that they began to understand was more real than the seemingly apparently real material reality of their bodies, which I
Hmm.
believe is it takes time and work to come to that place, first
Hmm.
through the idea, but then through the actions where it's just confirmed, and it changes it matures your identity. But it takes, again, a lot of time and a lot of work and a lot of challenge, and it's very rare. But when it happens, it should be like cherished. And the oligarchy has created a situation where they've controlled the narratives of these characters, like the official popular biographies of Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, to reduce them, to cut us off from that ability to sort of appreciate this universal well that they've all drawn from. Or Confucius, like the Confucius was trying to create, he wasn't just a philosopher sitting there as a belly button philosopher. He was in the real world trying to create a philosopher king, with a school, and he was advising governments getting like nearly killed and assassinated, as was Plato. They were trying. Plato was advising Dionysius the first and second and Dion, the leaders of Italy, of I think it was of I want to say Syracuse, but anyway, to become like real philosopher kings, to defeat the actual um you know priests
Priest
controlling
class. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the Temple of Delphi, the Persian Empire, that were trying to create a world government under feudalism back then. So they were living in the real world, and they were drawing their courage and their creative flexibility, as was Xenophon, a friend of Plato, who carried out the intervention into Persia, but that got subverted when his his buddy got killed, Cyrus the Younger, and they had to get the hell out, and that's the Thousand Day, the Thousand Army Survivor. All that to say, but there was this beautiful drama, this tapestry that's tied to also these wonderful souls that are animated from something on high. And our comic books, our movies, our shows, our video games are all just cutting us off of that. So it takes a long time for young people to even appreciate how human beings could be better than what we see as these corrupt beings, these viruses that are just overpopulating the earth, destroying Mother Gaia, and you know, we get these cynical feelings that young people unprepared for these ideas in grade 1, grade 2 are getting fed, and of course they got no defenses.
Right.
So they easily become very much agents of the system as they get
Yeah.
older and older. And so you wouldn't be surprised to see a bunch of Greta Thunberg eco-terrorists, you know, who think that the best thing that they could do with their life is to blow up a hydroelectric dam
Or commit suicide, which is useless.
or do that. Yeah, that's
Don't do
becoming
that. You're a child of love. Like, what do you? Don't give into that narrative. Jeez.
yeah, it's bad, right? So
So
it's
do
tough.
you,
I mean, your question is it's a hard question because it's like it how I don't know how to deal with helping young people tap back into the natural source. That's that. Let's.
well, part of my, having taught business students for 10
Mm,
years too, like I didn't want to teach, I didn't want to write a book. Why did I call it The Economics of Happiness? Because etymologically, I was like, wait a minute, happiness is oidaimonia. What does that mean? Well-being of your soul, well-being of spirit. So like again, the only thing I could do with my business students at an MBA level is grab them for a second and say, hang on a minute, you're crematists. What's that mean? Well, crema is money in Greek, right? You're graduating as crematists, not oikonomists, right? Household stewardship. And so again, simply speaking the truth behind the words, right? And English is, some say it's the devil's language, and it's uh, it, that to me kind of is my hope that you can stop someone for a moment to reflect that we can actually create a more compelling uh, tomorrow,
yeah,
that's worthy of our collective affection, right? Why
mhm.
do we acquiesce into this despairing, like, oh my God, climate, like, why do you believe climate change? I'm a forester. Like, do I do I get fired? Do I have errors in emission insurance on not forecasting the economic future? No way. And yet we believe these models that say, oh, we're doomed. It's like, says who? Says a mathematical model. Did you go
Yeah.
talk to the tree? Did you hug the tree? Did you try to do some qigong in the meadows? Like, So
Well, yeah,
I'm curious,
and
like, are you attracting a lot of youth? And how about Quebec youth? I mean, they're
yeah, no, I mean, you know, like there's definitely some spectacular young people that are in our orbit. But it's a concern that Cynthia and I both share is that like I would say the majority of the people, not the big majority, but the majority still of people who have still a concentration span to read the sorts of articles and that we produce or the books that we produce is still leaning towards the older age spectrum. People in their
yeah,
mid to late 60s, 70s,
like
80s.
me, like
We got some 90-year-olds.
I'm as old as dirt. I'm like, no, not that old.
Well, it's how old are you? What are you like 58 or something here? Or what?
I am 64.
You're 64.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Like
Well, I'll just say no,
my
look,
sister says, "Where's your gray hair?" It says, "Oh, on my chest." So, anyways.
ah.
Oh my God, like I
um
got this attitude. I'd say like, yeah, I came out smiling. My mother's holding me when I was 6 months, and I'm like, I don't know why did I come out smiling? I mean,
you
I
didn't come
come
up,
out like, what's wrong?
they didn't give you a smack? They didn't give you a
What's
smack?
No, it's like, what's wrong with this world? People who like do past life regression says, that's weird. You have no past life. It's like, thank God. Like, I'm in here for the first time. Like, this is paradise. What's wrong with everybody?
No, it's a beautiful thing. And I think that you've just, you know, I like LaRouche, you know, like there's this
I
you've
like
probably heard me
LaRouche too.
if you
I do too.
yeah, he's a fun guy and he really gave me a lot of foundation, I guess, when I was trying to start getting when I started to start thinking through solutions a bit more, reading a lot of his works early on in 2006, I guess is when I started really trying to work through so and his writings can be challenging, you know, he had this philosophy that I could see early on had at its core this faith in the intrinsic goodness of humankind. And I remember I was reading a transcript from 1994 when he spoke at the Russian Academy of Sciences, and he had all these like old crusty Russian academic types, dialectic materialists
Yeah.
sitting around, and he begins you're thinking like he just got out of jail, he's now in Russia
Oh, it's
doing like he's presenting to
unbelievable.
the Duma.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the first thing he says when he speaks at this presentation is babies are fundamentally good. He's like, you're talking about babies being good. And I didn't get it until I started I began later on interacting with more of these older dialectic materialist types, that I was like, oh, that's why you hammered at this. Because there's this core problem of rampant cynicism about the human condition embedded within Russia's psyche, even before there was dialectic materialism. There's a problem of like this Tolstoy-esque sort of cynicism of progress, of leaping beyond the limits to growth, striving for ideals. That's a problem. There's again a Russian current that expresses an embrace for these things. Like Mendeleev was a great example of that. Or a lot of the allies that worked with Lincoln to bring in the Russian Navy to save the United States when it was going through its crisis in the 1860s. A lot of those people who worked with Alexander II to free the serfs, to do war against the feudal oligarchs of Russia, they were people who had this like more Promethean loving spark, because Prometheus isn't just this devilish creature that wants to defy authority, as many of the Neoplatonists have promulgated, but rather when you read the story of Aeschylus's Prometheus, it's contingent upon the love of mankind. That's actually there when Prometheus is challenged by Hermes, or a Hermes-like character within the story, to say, well, just give it up, just give Zeus what he wants,
Yeah.
and you'll go free. We'll stop torturing you. And he says no, because what I know that eventually Zeus will be defeated by his own internal flaws, whereas I love humanity and the potential of what humans are more than my own life. And he's very clear in that story, which is why also Plato in the Protagoras dialogue defined himself as a Promethean. It's through the love of humankind that you're given the strength to face the slings and arrows, right, of outrageous fortune.
Yeah.
And so these people around Tsar Alexander II, who was also murdered, he was martyred by terrorists, and he knew he very likely would be, but he continued on.
What era was that? What year?
And
What year was he martyred?
He got blown up. 1880, he got killed
1880. Wow.
by a London directed terrorist operation that was associated with the Holy Brotherhood within Russia. This old feudal order of families around a grouping that found themselves, the heirs of Rurik, that wanted to restore a sort of pagan thing. But anyway, this was like what was behind the creation of the Okhrana, the Russian secret police, that ultimately ran these anarchists. Like Prince Kropotkin was a member of this sect, as was Mikhail Bakunin in another way. And this is what killed Alexander II. It killed something like 200 different Russian leaders over the next 30 years. And it was operational it had its own variation within Germany as well, that killed many, many German leaders, including Walter von Rathenau.
After Bismarck, yeah.
Oh yeah. As soon as Bismarck was ousted, the assassination, the age of assassinations really was unleashed in Germany. It was, Sadi Carnot of France, the president there, was murdered by a similar anarchist attack. But it was everywhere, and they were all coordinated in a centralized way, just like Al Qaeda is today, by intelligence operations centered in the Anglo-American axis.
So I'm curious about you've got a German last name, right?
Yeah.
And my name is Polish, but my name is Engel. We went to Danzig, which is Gdansk now, under Catherine the Great, right? Who came from that part of Poland, I guess.
Yeah.
And so what are your roots? And what I'm intrigued with is not that your German side has informed you in any way, but your understanding of this dynamic between like the Russian sentiment, the Russian persona. Like what do you have come to appreciate about the Russian persona versus the British, the Corporation of London persona, and why has there been that sort of animosity or which we see playing out again.
Again, you asked, that's a very challenging question, but I think my hypothesis, at least, I don't know, but I mean, my
No, that's
hypothesis,
okay.
I've got some feelings about it, and one of the
Yeah,
things I think strikes upon the attack on the beach of Sevastopol just recently, this week, where many civilians were injured, about 4 or 5 people were killed, 2 kids, from Ukraine, and I think, you know, it's a particularly holy day that happened on. It happened in conjunction with a terrorist attack in Dagestan against a synagogue,
right.
and the slitting of the throat of a very influential rabbi who was working as a leader, behind ecumenical relationships between Christians and Muslims and Jews in Dagestan.
Jeez.
Very important guy. He had a few statues in homage of him, with a friend of his who's a priest and another friend who's an imam in Dagestan. So I think that was done not just geopolitically to get the effect of chaos, but I think that symbolically, the striking of the beach, and people say, oh, it was an accident. The Russian anti missile system shot down the 5 missiles that were launched, and they were American cluster bombs, by the way, that were actually aimed at churches, but they accidentally hit a beach. I think in my analysis that some of them might have were likely aimed at churches, but at the same time, the beach was very meaningful because that was the beach that Vladimir the Great converted to Christianity on in the 10th century. And it means a lot because his conversion came with the whole conversion of Russia officially now.
And Kiev.
Yeah, and Kiev is like, you know, they've got Marina Abramovich now as their ambassador for children's safety for the last like 9 or 10 months. That's been the case, who's been overseeing like spirit cooking and weird occult rituals. And you know, they've really declared war on the Russian Orthodox Church, like that that certain type of Christianity that the Russian Orthodox Church expresses has been seen as like a state terrorist threat to be purged. People have been in jail, murdered in Ukraine, who are part of the church.
Unbelievable. Jeez.
So you have a satanic takeover of a big chunk of something, and I won't say too much more than that. With that's very influential in Ukraine. That's been reviving a romanticization of people like Stefan Bandera, the you know, Nazi, or the Nazi collaborator who oversaw the murder of like 90,000 Jews and Slavs during World War II, and then who was put to work, given a new job under Allen Dulles' lead in British intelligence after World War II in West Germany.
That's right.
With, you know,
I remember you going on that one. It's like, what?
It gets weird, right?
It's so weird. Yeah.
So I think that there's something inside of Russia which has a very strong character tied to moral principles that are non-negotiable. And the oligarchy really wants people a certain type of cultural matrix that is more fluid and unbounded from consistent moral principles around which proper judgments of right and wrong can be made, that allows us to both diagnose corruption and problems that might be masquerading as beauty but is actually ugly, but in its essence, but has the surface appearance of beauty. So the moral internal soul criteria of judgment has been removed from many people who have succumbed to the oligarchy's cultural matrix, which makes them more inclined to cultural relativism, moral relativism, like the crap that I was exposed to in art school that I rejected, that made the ugly appear good, you know, but it's really a trap. You can't judge what's ugly or what's beautiful. Now,
speaking of which, do you know the work of Father Seraphim Rose?
Yeah, he was the guy who was like, he was like gay, and he converted to Orthodox.
Russian Orthodox, became one of the greatest, you know, American Russian Orthodox.
I have to read more of his stuff. I don't know.
Basically,
I've heard of the name, but I don't know much more than that.
His book of, you know, he was San Francisco hippie, right? 1970s. He converts and he writes a book on. He predicts the time we're in, a state of relativism and nihilism. He said that's where we're going. And so when you said, you know, it's triumph of relativism. So it's really important, because my understanding of Russia, and again, I go back to reading these crazy books called The Ringing Cedars of Russia, which was this Vedras storyline. You got to read these books. I mean, they're a very quick read, and they're So they're based on this whole culture that was Rus, like ancient understanding of everyone had a hectare of land, everyone had enough, right? The operating principles of love, right? The dacha, which even this in Moscow now that every Moscowite has kind of this right little garden plot. That's all in the spirit of the Rus and Anastasia, as you say it. Interesting enough, is this book, which was written in Russian, was translated by John Woodsworth, who's a Russian linguist from the University of Ottawa, who I got to know, whose father was the founder of CCF, one of the co-founders. So
Hmm.
isn't it interesting? He translates these books, and my friend Linda Miroslava Sabath, a Russian atheist turned Orthodox nun, was a spiritual advisor on the books. So my point in all that is you have this kind of look into the ancient Russian culture mindset, which some say is 20,000 plus years old. And it was actually Prince Vlad who encountered them in Kiev and pushed them back in the taiga, said they were heathenistic. And um, so again, all these threads coming together saying, how does, and I guess I'll flipping back to LaRouche saying, okay, so was he onto something? Like, what are the BRICS countries actually up to? Could they overturn the tables of the money changers here by presenting something much more compelling, whether it's gold-backed currencies or it's real asset-backed, as LaRouche, I think, argued, right? Is there hope in your mind that this is something that will become the more compelling, right, vision of our future?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, like it. The thing that I got out of reading a lot of LaRouche's works, and he made some serious breakthroughs on the issue of the science of physical economy back in his attempts to refute the information theorists of the 1950s, people like Norbert Wiener and John von Neumann, the founders of information theory, but also game theoreticians who were trying to like mathematize human society. And he describes in his autobiography on the Power of Reason and a few other places how he was trying to wrestle with their idea of human nature and their idea of systems analysis per se. And this is at the that wrestling, that intellectual internal battle he had, since a lot of the people in his environment that he was in New York at the time were very much being influenced towards sympathy with the Norbert Wiener paradigm, which is again very cold, soulless, hyper materialist, dangerous stuff. It's actually at the heart of today's transhumanist religion.
Whoa,
It's all of
wow.
it.
Jeez.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So he goes through that, and his insight, having worked through, he had a bit more initiative than some others, and he had a cultural background as an artist, somebody who had worked through a lot of the musical compositions of some of the great masters, but also a lot of the works of scientists like Leibniz and Kepler. He'd worked through them. He just did the work, and so he had resources that many lacked to uh, come up with a solution concept that also opened up the door for his ability to create a science of physical economy, or establish something that I guess maybe it already existed as he describes it. And as I've come to discover, it's true. Before he was born, there was already a science of physical economy that was
Mhm.
that was growing and developing through such people like Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Even Luca Pacioli and Da Vinci played a role in what was
Yes.
first known as cameralism. Then it was later on took the form of dirigism in France. This informed the greatest people around Ben Franklin that were organized in Ben Franklin's junta, to come up with a science of population growth outlined in Ben Franklin's papers from 1729 on the necessity of a paper currency, where he like
Right.
clearly outlines
Yeah,
an anti-Malthusian system
I
of
was gonna
economics.
say, yeah, I read that, the Philadelphia experiment, the whole, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. The Pine Tree Shilling before that, his colonial script.
yeah,
But it was all based on the idea that human nature is something which yearns to improve, to self-improve, to make the world better for our kids. So that's like the
yeah.
foundational idea.
Okay.
And around that, you could then have a framework around which you could have, whether it's it doesn't matter whether you tie your currency to gold or silver or fiat or plastic
Or
shoes or shoelaces. It doesn't matter.
doesn't matter. No, no.
It's really if that sense of natural law and tied to a very specific type of understanding of what human nature is and what it isn't, is present as far as what shapes your idea of what your ambitions will be, what your proper goals will be for the future, how you channel and organize your resources and your priorities to make something happen that is impossible in the moment, but that requires discoveries to be made for that goal to be achieved, then you're going to be generally leaning into the unknown, but in a lawful way, right? Like jumping off the bird doesn't know if it's going to be able to fly when it leaps off the branch or gets pushed off, but there's a wiring to natural law that the bird is going to generally fly, unless there's a defect with it, right? But so it's like that with humans too, except that it requires now a faith that we've been able to prepare the moral and intellectual foundations for the kids who will now grow up and do the job and not get lost when you push them out to sea, right? They'll be able to navigate because you've taught them astronavigation, you've taught them astronomy. They're not going to be lost at sea. They'll figure things out generally. So from there, people like Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, Gouverneur Morris, Robert Morris were all followers of this Colbertist doctrine of dirigism, which informed the first expression or rendition of the American system of political economy. And you could read it, you know. I read the writings of Hamilton. And I used to hate Hamilton. I thought he was like a Rothschild stooge.
I know.
I'm consuming as much conspiracy research as I can to figure out what's going on. And 99% of it all has the common theme that Hamilton was a proto Rothschild deep state fascist in America.
Yeah.
It's like I read his writings and I look at what he did and I study what the National Bank was that he created and how America was able to quadruple its population in its first 40 years.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute. That's actually the thing that they've been trying to stop. And that's what
right.
brought back with the greenbacks. And that's what FDR brought back with the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. That's what JFK was bringing back.
That's what JFK was trying to do.
I mean, he had a whole, it took on a different form in each of these renditions, but it's all been the same thing. And that's what LaRouche sort of tapped into without even knowing it. It took him another 23 years to realize what he was tapping into. It was only in the 70s that he realized what the current was.
So just a point of like, do you think LaRouche and Galbraith were friends? No. But Galbraith was advising Kennedy's.
Galbraith, I think, was an agent.
Okay.
He brought in a lot of the Rand Corporation Malthusians into administrative positions within Kennedy's administration. And whether or not Galbraith himself was well-intended or not, I don't know what was going on in his heart of hearts. I don't know. But he he was a Keynesian. He was a follower of John Maynard Keynes.
Right. Yeah.
Who I know through my own research now, I fully know, it's not even like an opinion anymore, that FDR, though we are told differently, FDR was himself anti-Keynesian. He was an enemy of John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes despised Roosevelt. He wrote that Roosevelt is an incompetent twat.
Wow.
Not those words, but
yeah, basically.
FDR did call John Maynard Keynes a mathematical fetishist and not an economist. And we've all been lied to. And I think Galbraith was being a devoted follower of Maynard Keynes, whether he knew it or not, was an agent of the Fabian Society, which Keynes was a leading member of as
there you go.
Apostle.
Yeah.
And he also did believe in the Malthusian trap in his own way. So he might have meant well, maybe. But intellectually, he was compromised heavily, and he did bring in the Rand Corps technicians into Kennedy's administration who were working against Kennedy from within the entire time and took over Kennedy's dead body. So Galbraith, no. Maybe Galbraith's son might be okay. I don't know.
Maybe James is okay, but
yeah, James. If James is listening to this,
I
think you're okay, James.
So I love quoting.
Don't prove me wrong.
I always quote Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, a supposed letter Keynes wrote in 1930, I believe, where he repudiated usury. He called it a misdemeanor. It's like, whoa. So, whether he actually wrote that or someone wrote it,
I don't care. I think he was.
I don't care.
It's honey on poison. For me, the guy was still the president of the Eugenics Society, or the treasurer of the Eugenics Society. Up until his last death, he was a lifelong devoted member. He was a lifelong devoted Malthusian, and I think that some of these guys, they can't the devil won't come in if he says he's the devil. He's
Yeah.
got to say nice, sweet nothings that appeal to your sentiments in order to be like taken in by people
Yeah.
he wants to seduce. And I think a lot of these things, it doesn't mean I've read so much Keynes at this point, and I've studied who he was so much at
But
this point that it
yeah,
doesn't mean anything when I
to
hear
your,
like,
but to your point on Hamilton, it's like, even if you didn't see the musical, like you'd say, let's read the man's work. Like if
yeah,
it's in fact his work, then we'll judge his character on that basis.
yeah,
Uh, one more question, and I always my last question is always what gives you hope in the present time. But uh, and I don't need to go into this is a deep rabbit hole, but the nature of usury, and because that's been my obsession, is like the church, Catholic Church was clear that it was considered it's against Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and it was considered forbidden by the Catholic Church, and then by I think it was 1840 the Pope kind of went silent, and his last comment on usury was, "Well, I'll defer to my economic advisors on the future of," and and
yeah,
and today we have a runaway train of a ridiculous usurious system in which I've been saying it's completely unnecessary, and having studied that system of how loans are created, and the multiply the leveraging of the creation in those ratios. So I've been working with First Nations saying, if you want true sovereignty, I can help you play the same game against them. Not even that they're your enemy. It's just that, and we can go back to the ancient, because the indigenous people had the first forms of money came out of the Polynesians. And I've worked in French Polynesia with the Tahitians, and I realized, wait a minute, all the cowrie shells that became wampum in Turtle Island, North America, came from the South Pacific, right? They came from, and the Tahitians are the older sisters of the Hawaiians and the Maori, and the indigenous Tahitians or Polynesians came from Taiwan. So here you have this long story where the seashell becomes the basis of Chinese currency, right? Is the foundation of wampum. And you're like, well, and Edmonton was one of the great, we're known as the happy hunting ground. This is where the great Pehonan gathering place trading center was, right? And where I live here on the Saskatchewan River, where wampum was used as a kind of medium of exchange, basis of treaties, and represented value. And yet you say, well, how did that bag of cowrie shells on my shelf here get determined value without ever thinking about usury? And so that's more of a commentary on a little bit of the history of money. But then how do we kind of overcome this? How do we restore the kind of the wisdom that usury is unnecessary in your view?
I mean, we have to restore what people need to understand what human beings are in their true essence. Like Plato said, you have to know thyself before you can properly engage in discussions of justice or engage in politics. You have to come through a process of self-discovery first, and then try to go out at the same time and start making changes. And you'll find, I think, that when I look at myself or other people that I've admired throughout history, it's reciprocal. Like the more you discover internally, it happens at the same time. Like my discovery first was intellectual with my mother. The idea that when she said I would not take that $1 million to just make a photocopy and give it to a rival to the company. At first it was intellectual, but then I had to start trying it out and living in charity, like in the higher sense of the
Right.
charity term, not pity
Charity.
charity, but
Yeah.
higher
Yeah.
charity. And
Yeah.
and the more I did it by doing good works, the more I was like, oh yeah, this is actually more natural. I'm actually happier with myself. I'm actually finding love for others. So it's like you got to get people into both theory and practice at the same time type of thing,
And
and
it's harder to live in a state of, well, it's harder to lie, right? And live with lying. As
yeah.
I've learned working with politicians, it's like, wow, it takes a lot of energy.
It does, because you have to remember every single lie, and every lie requires more lies to cover it up. And a certain
Oh,
point, and you're talking to different people,
I know.
different stories, and you have to like remember what lies did I give to this person? And then somebody sees something that's not consistent, and I have to come up with another lie to patch up my inconsistency. My God, the stress.
I know.
Yeah.
Kudos to the energy it takes. Yeah.
Yeah. For the misuse of creativity. Yeah, and it's just so much easier just to be authentic.
So,
Yeah.
so what gives you hope? You're
Well, it's
brilliant.
that, you know,
Yeah.
this is that I've come to develop a deep faith, and I believe understanding that this is actually the true nature of what we are as a species, is to be happy, authentic people. And so whatever happens in the immediate term ahead, I don't know. It could get really bad, you
It
know.
could, yeah, it could get really funky, you know.
But at the same time, it's not the first time, you know. And I'm reading in my studies on history, I've come to realize that it's not like the past was so great and now we're in this crap
Yeah,
situation of corruption and
no.
evil. It's like, no, there was always, it was bad most of the time, and highly unjust, and the masses were highly gullible and misinformed most of the time. um so it's nothing special. Like, it's not like now we're in a particularly bad spot, except that we do have nuclear weapons, which
Yeah.
add a touch of danger to the whole, like, you know, slip into a dark age thing. But what gives me hope, on top of my faith that human beings are fundamentally good, that's what, and also not just because we are and the universe is otherwise petering out and dying in some entropic heat death. I don't believe that either. I believe that the
No.
universe itself is created good and
Yeah.
anti-entropic, and I thank LaRouche for helping to clarify a good reasoning process of why that must be true. And I believe that it's more than a belief. I know that that's true now, that the universe is anti-entropic, creative, reasoning, loving. Like, these are the attributes of the universe, of which we are
Mm.
made in the image of that process. And we're happy when we're acting according to those prescripts. And I'm looking at parts of the world which are maybe outside of my NATO cage, but I mean, I look at Russia, I look at China, I look at a lot of the leadership around Iran and Saudi Arabia right now, and I'm just seeing these adult, like, this real maturity, this emotional, intellectual maturity expressed by leadership, people able to wield political power in those parts of the world and across Africa too, which is great.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which seems to, not only not seems to, it is expressing the best display of what humanity has been throughout history. I'm seeing this coming into a greater sense of clarity, both intellectually but also in practice. And I'm looking at the policies for breakthroughs on the atomic domain, regarding nuclear fusion, superconducting magnets that have created magnetic confinement in plasmas that China has
Mm.
spearheaded, which are breaking world records, overthrowing whole systems of science that are not accounting for the new phenomenon that we're now seeing, both
Wow.
on that level as well as the Russia-China programs for developing space research, permanent lunar colonies on the far side of the moon, replete with helium-3 for fusion energy. It's a fusion fuel, which are being really embarked upon in a serious way that will overthrow, like, one truckload of helium-3 as a fuel taken from the moon, where it doesn't exist on the earth really, but from the far side of the moon there's billions of tons of this. One truckload will provide for enough energy needs for 8 billion people at a very high standard of living for 1 year.
What?
1 year. So you could see why the oligarchy's been trying to sabotage the development of fusion power for the last 50
Oh,
years,
that makes sense. Yeah.
because it overthrows every system of
Yeah.
control that they've adapted to. So I
Wow.
see these things, and they're so multi-generational in their perspective.
Yeah.
They're being actualized by a revival of national banking practices that were once only represented by Roosevelt's Reconstruction Finance Corporation or Lincoln's greenback structures. And I'm seeing that behavior of their public credit system operating in that manner, especially within China, but it's catching on throughout the BRICS nations. So that these are things that do give me a lot of hope for
It's
humanity as a
exciting.
whole.
It's exciting
Yeah,
for all of us and
yeah,
Canadians, and yeah.
yeah. I'm hoping that we can get our heads out of our asses and take a lesson from this at
Let's
some
just
point.
get over our,
Some
like,
point.
what, yeah,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
But no, it's well, thank you, Matt. I know everyone asks you, so where can we find you? And you're all over YouTube, and you've got Canadian Patriot Press, is that correct?
Yeah, well, it's Canadian Patriot .org is the name of that website, and
Yeah.
risingtidefoundation.net is another website I manage with my wife. And recently I produced a book that recently came out called Science Unshackled.
Ah,
Image of
good.
it. It's restoring causality to a world in chaos.
Wow.
So if people want to pick that, it's part of the 4-volume Clash of the Two Americas series. This is like kind of volume 5, but this one deals with the battle to suppress science. And I got one chapter in here in the revival of Pythagorean thinking needed to overthrow standard models and other things.
Cool.
So there's a lot in there that people could check out on
That's fantastic.
canadianpatriot.org. Yeah.
Are you self-publishing, you and Cynthia, or are you?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, some
Or
of our
through,
translated works in Italy or Japanese or Russian were picked up by publishers in those countries, but our English works were all self-published. Yeah.
wow. So what's your platform? Are you in Kindle digital press or no? Just yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to
Uh,
say
no, but
it's
that's
Amazon.
well, I have two books, with the New Society out of Gabriel Island, and
Huh.
I love them, but it's like if I write another book, it's not going to be with a publisher. It's just yeah,
There's a lot of freedom. I
yeah.
wish that there was something that would allow me to self-publish outside of Amazon, but it's been difficult to find an alternative that works. So I'm still looking. If people have
So
advice, let me know. Well, I think as as the crisis continues to get bad, people's hunger to put out the fire is going to increase. Sometimes the fire has to be felt a little bit before we appreciate water. So I think the demand is naturally going to increase for higher ideas. So it's good that
hard
you
it
just
is,
trudged
and
out and you're consistent, being
yeah,
being that guy the
and
whole
I
time.
think to your point too, like earlier point is like there's a pragmatism, like whether it's Confucianism, right? There's a pragmatism here that it's like I'm like the economy well-being is not it's actually not a difficult concept to implement it, to manage everything in terms of this complexity of well-being might seem difficult, but it's actually not that difficult. And
No, the most difficult thing is I think the oligarchy. Like you
yeah,
gotta it's
uh,
this like you got to go to war with the oligarchy, and this is the hard thing that a lot of people
yeah.
have not understood. Like the oligarchy is really quite sophisticated, and they're
Oh
good
yeah.
at being evil,
Yeah,
and they're good at
exactly.
creating rules that they're not going to follow, but they want people to the degree that we agree to their rule system and their axioms that they've created, we lose our ability to properly judge and carry out a fight against them. So that's
But
well, there's definitely a whole domain of human psychology that most people are not supposed to even be allowed to think about, who are plebes. But both touching upon the good, like what I mentioned regarding the positive
mhm.
so-called heroes of human society who are able to tap into the same well of human sentiments to access the higher emotion, the higher sentiments, right, that are accompanied with higher ideas. So thought and feelings can grow together or decay together. And for those who did really good creative flanks against the oligarchy and for freedom, they were tapping into the same well that's investigatable. And I think it gives us a sense of what human beings are at their best, what we're meant to be in our
Yes.
happiest state, even though we're often we will risk suffering physically when that happens. Now, why I say that is because inversely, when you read people like Edgar Allan Poe,
I
they're
loved your stuff on him. Wow, that was
yeah, thanks, man.
amazing.
It's just getting
Oh,
started, dude. It's just getting started.
it's
But you
unbelievable.
you start seeing that he's really providing such a clear diagnostic to the oligarchical state of mind of
Right,
somebody
right.
who has been initiated into these dark realms and has developed controlled schizoid personality disorders that have involved them being able to sort of create a demon. It's sort of like trauma-based mind control is a
Yeah,
lower
yeah, yeah,
order
yeah.
version of what they do to themselves on a higher order. And you'll have highly functional oligarchs or people who have been through that process who are highly functional in the daytime. You turn off the night and you create the right kind of climate with incense, maybe a little narcotic or something, and they will
Oh,
be
it's
able
like
to
it's like they
they
have
will lose
split.
themselves and become a killing demon. Okay.
Yep, not. I'll just
Goodbye,
stop.
folks. Thanks
Stop
all for
recording.
watching.
That's it. That's all, folks.